For more on this, we can bring in Lucas Scott, professor of international politics and American studies at Clinton Institute, University College, Dublin. Lucas, thanks for joining the program today.
Thank you for having me here.
Now, Lucas, as you heard in that report there, these Russian jets were flying around for 12 minutes. Why did NATO allow the planes to fly that long?
Well, I think first of all, as you're monitoring these Russian planes, you're not sure they're going to actually cross into the border and get into Estonian airspace. But then when they do, you've got a difficult decision to make. And that is you need to try to deter this threat if it indeed is a threat, but you're also wary of escalation. Turkey in 2015 took the step of actually shooting down a Russian surveillance jet that was over its airspace, but that threatened the possibility of military confrontation between Ankara and Moscow. NATO doesn't want to do that, so what you do is you track the planes, establish exactly where they are, establish whether they might attack, and then you try to escort them out of the territory. That explains why you had this 12-minute period.
Now, also, Russia is denying that they actually were in protected airspace. What is Russia's goal here with this? What is Russia trying to do? Are they testing NATO's capabilities?
Well, the Russians would say that, wouldn't they? Look, let's put this in the context of other incidents that we've had in the past 2 weeks. We've had a Russian drone incursion into Poland with around 20 drones that were in Polish airspace, several of them downed. We then had a Russian drone a few days later that flew over Romania, and now we get this incursion by not just by one fighter jet, that's off course, but by 3 fighter jets. And I think you had a series of European officials and leaders who said yesterday, quite rightly, that Russia is testing NATO. NATO has declared Eastern Sentry to protect the countries with an air defense almost shield. And Russia's sort of saying, okay, let's see if you're serious about this. I don't think the Russians want to take this farther into effectively a military confrontation, but they want to see if NATO, in effect, can be pushed back just a bit, just as Russia has been testing the limits of NATO support for Ukraine, not just for the recent days, but for years.
Now, as you mentioned there, we don't want this conflict to grow, but with Russia's actions, Romania has now become the second NATO member to request an Article 4 consultation following Poland, as you mentioned there, with those incursions and in those Russian drones in their airspace. So we're not yet at Article 5, but it is, as you were saying, a bit of a balancing act for NATO. So what are the options for NATO to react to this?
Well, I think the immediate step for NATO is to provide the assurances to all members on that eastern flank. And of course, that includes not just the Baltic states, includes not just Romania, but it includes Poland as well, which is that we will respond to any Russian drones, aircraft or missiles that are over your territory. But then I think that it's interesting that the issue then goes a bit wider. And that is, and again, this is part of why Russia is testing. It comes back to Ukraine in terms of where does NATO go with its security guarantees for Ukraine. I think there's an immediate question that's beginning to be discussed, which is whether NATO members would actually down Russian missiles that were over Ukraine. There have been big threats by Russian officials, especially the former President Dmitry Medvedev, that Russia would consider that an act of war. But I think not quite as challenging as that would be the extent of European countries and how far they go with the planning for security guarantees for Ukraine. How far do you go in terms of building up the air defenses? Air defenses not only to deal with the daily strikes which are taking place on Ukraine's civilians, but also the drone and missile strikes trying to hit Ukrainian military facilities, for example, drone manufacturing facilities. We know those discussions have been going on for some time. We know that Europe's wanting to bring the US into those discussions. And effectively, Russia is trying to disrupt them by saying, look, you don't want to escalate this. You don't want to. Whereas I think NATO's response is this isn't escalation we're talking about. This is protecting Ukraine and Eastern Europe from Moscow's aggression.
Lucas, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your analysis. That's Lucas Scott, Professor of International Politics and American Studies at Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Moving on